Well, security is at the forefront of what we'll be discussing today, particularly in the light of a report which will be released today. The Tony Blair Institute will be releasing a report on security here on the state of Boko Haram, especially as the country is set to mark 12 years since the incursion of this violent extremist group which was unleashed in Nigeria 12 years ago. We have with us in our studios this morning Brigadier General Sani Usman, who is a former Director, Army Public Relations. General, you're welcome to Sunrise Studies this morning.
Good morning. Thank you for having me on your program.
Well, so many, will I say, offshoots of this violent extremism, which has done quite a number on our security agencies, on our security apparatus, and also has now, morphed into many, many offshoots, because people are saying that this so-called banditry looks like something that could also have sprang forth from the Boko Haram uprising. Do you agree with them?
Well, I think it is worrisome, like you rightly said, because beyond the violent religious extremism, we are also experiencing ethnic violent extremism. It's a new norm now. It wouldn't be surprising, actually, if the banditry that we are experiencing in some parts of the country has semblance with the issue of terrorism and insurgency. Take, for instance, the copycat syndrome of abduction of school children, after the Chibok, we had the Tapchi and then Kankara and so on and so forth. So there is every likelihood that there is a kind of connection between the two. More so, if you look at the video footages and the messages they sent across, there is every likelihood that there are semblance. And more so, if you look at it, the Boko Haram, as it was known way back 2009, has kind of branches, so to speak, or splinter groups, apart from Jama'at Ahl Sunnah led by then Sheikh, you have the Iswab, and of course you have the Ansaruddin. So there is every likelihood, and there is a kind of some semblance of Boko Haram terrorists in these issues. But to what extent, actually, I cannot say precisely, but it is very disturbing and worrisome too.
In terms of what, the rise of banditry?
Exactly, because look, it is not just banditry. Any security challenge, any security problem should be worrisome to anybody, because it inhibits, so many things in life: freedom of movement, freedom, in fact, right to life and what have you, because you cannot imagine a situation whereby somebody will be abducted and they will start haggling just like they are selling chicken or goat in the market. And beyond that, if you go to Northwest, there are instances where people have been denied the right not just to life, but the right to livelihood, in the sense that they are sending messages that they should not go and farm unless they pay a certain amount of money in the whole, in a country. And, people in the rural area, they are basically subsistence farmers. They just live by that. So, you see, it has to, be worrisome. That's what I mean.
Initially when Boko Haram started, for many, for many years, we're pretty content to say that, okay, it was treated as a security problem, even though there were those who were saying that we needed to treat this with carrot and stick. I don't know what the carrot was going to be, but then the stick we're all aware of, which was a military onslaught. We're pretty content with the fact that it was confined to the northeast of the country. Now we're beginning to see ripple effect, or at least what you've called the copycat syndrome, in parts of northwestern Nigeria, and it seems to be spreading to as far as north central. Look at what is happening in Niger State, and even the abductions that we've seen there as well. There are huge questions as to what is transpiring there. But looking at the ideology itself, which is what this Tony Blair reports, I don't know if you have had the chance to have a sneak peek. There was a press statement released on Friday Friday, and I think there were parts of the report attached to that particular press statement. If you have been able to see a sneak peek of that report, have you been able to see it? I
read the 47-page report.
The 47-page report. Yeah. Did you agree with some of the findings? Because some of the findings were neatly summarized for some of us to take a look at. That if we do not learn the lessons, if no lessons are learned from this Boko Haram violent extremist uprising, it's going to be very difficult to counter-insurgency, across the West African region and perhaps even beyond West Africa. What are your thoughts in terms of how we're taking lessons? Are we first in Nigeria taking any lessons from what has happened with Boko Haram in the northeast of the country?
Well, first and foremost, it is no question of whether I have agreed or not, but it is commendable that they have done such a marvelous work and provided solutions to some of the problems or issues raised. However, there are some lapses in the sense that it has not taken into cognizance some of the developments, particularly the local issues. Take, for instance, they were talking about counter-narrative, re-radicalizations and all the rest of them. But I know for sure at both federal and state level, a lot has been done, and I know the military also have a radio station and all the rest. Such things have not been captured in that report. But that's notwithstanding. Talking about whether we have learned lessons, of course we have. And it has brought to a fore so many things, the dynamics of the insurgency as it is, and its funding, the resilience, and of course the effort being made by the Nigerian state to counter, the terrorism and insurgency as it were, right from the federal government, the state, and of course the military. Take, for instance, at strategic level, you look at the level of partnership between the Nigerian state and the neighboring countries. At the initial stage, it was not so. And of course, their attitudes, left so much to be desired, because they look at it as more or less like a Nigerian problem, not till when President Buhari came in 2015 and decided to be a rallying point. But unfortunately, we did not even learn a lesson to the point that there should have been follow-up to this effect. And beyond that, again, the importance of some variables, socio-economic variables. Take, for instance, the role of religion, the role of ethnicity. And if you look at going back to history, bulk of the catchment areas or the epicenter of Boko Haram was the old Kanem Borno Empire. And if you look at the makeup of the ranks of the Boko Haram terrorists, almost 80-something% were of Kanuri extraction, and they took advantage of it. Look at how Muhammad Ali took advantage of being in exile in Cameroon and become a rallying point, and of course established a splinter group and what have you. So these are the issues. Then beyond that, again, the importance of local populace in terms of funding insurgency, because these people they blend with the society. Unlike the military that they have identifiable features, except if you come across with an insurgent that is armed, you won't even know. He will even live within the society and yet go out and commit havoc. So many things. And then again, the issue of funding of the security forces, the role of the media is particularly the social media, and the issue of taking holistic approach to some of these security challenges. It is not.
Let us dissect, because a lot of the issues you're raising now, you're raising them together. But if we were to pick them one after the other, if we agree that Boko Haram, the reason why it's been very difficult to stem the tide, and it will seem the wave of Boko Haram, whatever word you want to use, is because it is essentially an ideology.
Correct.
An ideology that it would seem that largely we have done very well in trying to terminate the lives or neutralize, as the military likes to say, neutralize those who believe in this ideology. But the question is, what efforts have we really made in neutralizing or watering down the ideology itself? Because that it seems to be where the challenge is. That extremist ideology, which is, which seems, a lot of people have said this is not Islamic. It is not Islamic at all. But there are people who say, oh, this has won the gab of being Muslim, so to speak. The people who are perpetrating this thing say that they're Muslim. They pray, they fast, they do all manner of things. But right at the heart of it, those who truly practice the religion say this is not in tandem with the religion. So as a people, have we shied away from confronting the idea, that Salafist ideology, which is firing this violence, extremism here in Nigeria, and how they are also copying this from other parts of the world? Are you seeing any parallels that we're following in that regard?
Yeah, I made mention of counter-narrative and, of course, radicalization. Ideally, the state is supposed to lead in this area because basically we have to situate the Boko Haram insurgency in proper perspective and context. Ideology plays a very significant role, but then we have to also look at the issue of good governance, to what extent education, the level of literacy in the society, employment, and all what have you. At the initial stage, we have had instances whereby well-educated people were carried away and where the Salafist factor come into play. They join them up. But as time goes on, bulk of the ranks and files of all these Boko Haram insurgents, they are neither properly educated in Islamic way and nor were they educated in the Western way. Bulk of them, of course, if you look at the Operation Sub-Corridor that they have in Gombe, bulk of them, they don't even know how to pray. So, the insurgents took advantage of this gap in terms of our educational system too. So, if you are dealing with this issue of ideology, you have to put it also in the right perspective. The issue, you have to address the educational gap, the level of poverty, because, not just poverty of ideas, but the fact that people are improvised in the sense that, they tend to give them material benefit to lure them in. Then you look at also the cultural affinity and the religious factor, because if you look at it, they were so clever, taking advantage of the position of Borno as the the center for Islamic learning, and all these things. So when you are coming up with counter-terrorism and counter-insurgency efforts, you have to take all those into cognizance. The issue of ideology and what are those things that water or helps it in flourishing. The issue of education, the issue of cultural affinity, the issue of religious affinity, and of course the Salafist idea that you have said. And thankfully, reports of that nature has shed more light. I think I was reading a book, The Paradox of Boko Haram. It seems to have reinforced the idea or what people neglected before, because there were so many assumptions which truly they were not exactly the same. Contrary to what they were saying, Muhammad Yusuf was trained in Saudi Arabia. No, he was, yes, going on pilgrimage might have played a key role. There were instances where he stayed for about 5 months, but there were no instances, evidence to prove that he was trained, and the relationship even with the, the Mid-Eastern part of, the insurgency. Take, for instance, people are saying that he was trained this and that, but it is not true. The issue is the issue of ideology, the universality of it, the kind of sense of belonging, and that is why you have the you have the the allegiance to ISIS and the splinter group of ISWAP, etc. So basically, ideology is equally key. And before you think of solution to the problem, you have to look at all those contexts.
How aggressive also would you say the Nigerian state has been in countering that ideology? Yes, you've stated all the other factors that make it particularly difficult to be able to counter the ideology, the challenges, the fact that, there is a cultural affinity, there is poverty of the mind, and also or financial poverty as well. There is a lack of education, etc., etc. However, knowing that these are the challenges, one would also think that if we realize what the challenges are, we should also go after them as aggressively as we would go after it militarily. 12 years down the line, would we say that we have learned that these are some of the challenges that are confronting, fighting this ideologically, and have also been able to, put up a resistance of some sort in the areas that have been affected, or at least in the areas we know could be vulnerable to this sort of ideology?
Yeah, well, I think it is no question of aggression. I think we should be systematic in the sense that insurgency is fluid and dynamic, and as it rises, we should be above the water, way ahead of them.
But we're not, are we?
Well, to some extent, we have done marvelously well. If you look at it compared to what we, other countries experience, take for instance, what is happening in Afghanistan, United States and the coalition and what have you, and Nigeria almost single-handedly, except for the fact that the coalition of the multinational joint task force and Lake Chad Basin Commission, we have done pretty well. Because if you look at way back 2009, 2010, 11, 12, up to 14, what was going on and what is happening now, I think we have done very well. But there is still room for improvement. And how do you improve on that? I think we should emphasize vis-a-vis the kinetic and non-kinetic aspects. Kinetic in the sense that instead of the aggression you are talking about, we should also consider other factors. Take, for instance, mighty as America is still on the negotiating table outside the theater operation in Afghanistan with the Taliban. Now, to what extent have we explored other aspects? And again, the issue of partnership, strategic partnership. Take, for instance, now we are surrounded by Francophone-speaking countries, and even without Boko Haram, to what extent have we addressed our educational system to include French language as one of our lingua franca in the country, particularly those in those states that are neighboring Cameroon, Chad, and Benin, and Niger Republic. These are issues because language plays a very decisive factor. Then again, to what extent have we built on the diplomatic shuttle embarked on the president? There are other components of the government that they should be talking to their counterparts. And that is why, so much as the multinational joint task force is doing the best it could, it is not good enough in the sense that the level of synergy of effort and cooperation is not being, followed the way it is supposed to be. Then again, we look at the funding of the security forces. But even before you even talk about that, I talked about holistic approach because the kinetic aspect or the military aspect in the counter-insurgency effort is more or less like just 40%. So what constitutes the 60%? The 60% we have not fully exploited the role of the state. You have the military doing virtually almost everything, civil, military, quick impact projects and, insertions and what have you. I think the state ought to have. And beyond that, again, the radicalization program, which even started way back, predates this administration, is more or less like military-driven, which is not supposed to be. So there are so many things that we should, release the military, let other components of Nigerian society be doing it. Then we look at the funding of the military. Then, of course, tasking itself, not just for the military, but the other security agencies also, and other components of Nigerian states. To what extent are they contributing to the solution of this problem? And we also look at the intelligence and information gathering system. There is concept of war economy. Now, if you look at it, in Borno State alone, I think we have about 200 non-governmental organizations, both local and international, and their pay is commensurate to the risks they are taking. So somewhere, somehow, somebody is benefiting to the detriment of the Nigerian society. If you look at it, it's more or less we are working across purposes. So there is need to streamline it, because some of them have started to even abuse the essence of why they have been there. So many things, so many things. But the most important thing also is the issue of good governance. Just, I'm not praising anybody, but if you look at what is happening in Borno State within the last 2 years, give you a kind of hope. And if you look at the role of poverty, poor infrastructure played in some of the security challenges, you will understand what I mean. That key to all these things is the fact that we have to improve in good governance. Let's have real dividends of democracy in terms of infrastructural development, educational facilities, healthcare facilities, and people should have a sense of belonging so that they have affinity and they will not associate themselves with these criminals.
Let's quickly go to Lagos now. I know that my colleague has a question for you. Ayo.
Well, thank you, Mark. I mean, you would agree with me that this is like a whole symposium on its own. I mean, just looking at this document, but General, one of the things that you've said, the most central of them for me, which of course is also reflected in that document, is that we are fighting a war of ideologies. Well, we should be taking a break shortly, but maybe we can just begin the conversation. It would sound to me, I mean, it does sound to me like it's because there is an absence of a particular ideology that another ideology could erode. Consequently, we've had this now for so many years. So if there is going to be any solution, according to part of the recommendations, we need to have a counter idea that is stronger than this one. And of course, it is true, it predates this administration. So I'm just wondering, how do you think we can even begin to couch an ideology that's all-embracing, that all Nigerians can own? Because it's not just Boko Haram that is, responsible for all of this insecurity, clearly, and the Boko Haram is just one of them. So many other elements, other components are responsible for all kinds and all levels of insecurity all over the nation. If I ask you to start responding, I will not be able to take our break. So if you don't mind, just give us a few seconds. Let's take a few messages, and we'll be right back. Just stay with us. Thanks for staying with us. General, you said earlier that the state should play the lead. And in terms of ideology, then that ideology should come from government, right? What should the ideology be, especially for such a state as Nigeria?
Well, the simple and short answer is that the ideology should be Nigerian ideology. We are a conglomeration of so many ethnic groups, languages, and what have you. We are heterogeneous. So we should come out with something that will give everybody a sense of belonging, in the sense that a Nigerian ideology could have been better. Beyond what we have in the constitutional provision, we the people, what does the Nigerian state aspire to be beyond, have security and welfare of the people? We should aspire to something that the average youth and every Nigerian should identify with, and give them kind of leverage that they can aspire and be proud of being Nigerians. So apart from the fundamental objectives, encouraging integration and all the rest, so we should think of what is unique about Nigeria. We have had instances where we had uniting factors. Take, for instance, the sports. In those days, when you make mention of Nigeria, the first thing that comes into your mind is the issue of football. But that is no more. Not even the jollof rice that we are talking about. There are other countries that are competing with Nigerian jollof rice. So we should be seen to aspire to other things that will identify us, that will give us sense of pride and belonging as Nigerians. And honestly, we have all that it takes. All we need to do is to harmonize what we have, because each of the indigenous societies, they have very good cultures that are tolerant and dynamic. So we harmonize that, and you will have a kind of Nigerian ideology that will be good, that everybody will identify with, either within the country or outside the country. And the average Nigerian is peace-loving, had this sense of brotherhood among themselves. So all this bulk of what we have been seeing, they are artificial. Once there is a sense of direction, I can tell you the ideology will come up. But beyond that, again, we have to look at so many issues. Take, for instance, the religious affinity or ethno-religious affiliations and what have them. There are good, some of them, but there are those that are bad. And those were the building blocks of this, extremists. And we have to make sure that it doesn't, outweigh the Nigerian state. And I can give you an example. In Sierra Leone, the average Sierra Leonean knows how to, whether he's a Muslim or he's a Christian, he knows how to recite the Lord's Prayer. And they know how to recite the 3 verses, surahs in the Holy Quran. So it's immaterial whether you are a Muslim or you are a Christian, you are a Sierra Leonean. And going just recently, Rwanda, you will be embarrassing a Rwandese by the time you ask him which ethnic group he belongs to or which God he worships. And those are the kind of value system we should inculcate in Nigerians so that they will think of themselves as Nigerian before any extraneous variables that he comes from a particular, or he worships a particular God, or he comes from a particular society. So their loyalty is to the Nigerian state.
Well, what you have just said now also underscores something. I mean, it's almost like saying there is hardly any ideology that is stronger than the religious one. And to imagine that, the religion is being exploited, especially by preachers, according to that, document that you said you've read all 47 pages. One of the findings, for instance, is that preachers glorified historical events and played into anti-establishment public sentiment, pitting populations against their official representatives. That's pretty much saying that the trust in the government is greatly depleted, and this trust is being exploited by these, extremists and dissidents and all of that. How can we even begin to redress that? You already made it clear that it predates this government and everyone is aware of that. How can we begin to address that, the gap of trust between the governed and their government?
Well, I made mention of it much earlier. I talked about dividends of democracy and good governance. Those are the deciding factor. And we are seeing it in so many states. Take, for instance, in Borno State. What is happening there? There is sincerity of purpose. So much infrastructural development, and in fact, the leadership there is so transparent to the point that people identify with it. So I can tell you, if we can reflect that in other parts of the Nigerian state, and continue and build it up, and, it cascade downward up to local government and what level, I think those issues will just come in naturally. But the starting point, honestly, is to improve in good governance. Let there be, improvement in the welfare of the people in terms of infrastructural development. And apart from that, also, leadership should be accountable, should be transparent, and give people sense of belonging, because the whole essence of it is for the people. So if you have all those things, I can rest assure you, Nigerians, I always mention it anywhere, any day, they are marvelous people, they are wonderful people. All they need is the right people to lead them, and you can see that they will get the best out of them.
Rightly said, there are Nigerians. So I'm just wondering, how we can bring them back, within the shortest possible time. For instance, one of the items there, says that most of the donations that these dissidents get come from within the country. There are local community members funding them. And this is also clearly something that I'm just wondering, how difficult can it be to track these individuals and arrest all of their activities if most of what they do, most of their successes come from within the country? How difficult can it be for us to track them and deal with them and cut down their activities?
I think it's not an issue of difficulty. How do we go about doing that, and which is very good. And if you look at that report very critically, most of the people that contributed, especially at the very beginning, some of them did that voluntarily, knowing fully well what it is meant for, but some of them did so unconsciously because they come at different, under various guises, in the name of Islam and what have you. But people are wiser, and more so now, there are legislation, look at the Terrorism Prevention Act, that talked about funding insurgency in whatever, manner, and you look at the financial intelligence unit. So these are things that we should, and it is not just about Islam. It cut across all religious divide. Take, for instance, there are people that give their churches humongous amount of money. Where do they come? How do they come about that amount of money and all the rest of the thing? So it's issue of accountability. It's issue of people being honest with themselves. That will help the security agencies and the government in doing its job properly. But at the same time again, we should take advantage of the situation we found ourselves by being honest with ourselves, by telling us the truth. Telling ourselves the truth. Because we have not been talking with ourselves, rather we have been talking to ourselves. And of course there are more than enough government agencies that could do that we leverage on. And take, for instance, even the National Orientation Agency. To what extent have we taken advantage of it? And it is not just at federal level, it has branches across the state and across the local government. And beyond even the National Orientation Agencies, almost all the security agencies and almost all the political parties, particularly the major ones, they have people at work. To what extent are we inculcating value system? To what extent are we mentoring our youth? To what extent are we giving, accountable and transparent leadership? Are we being honest with ourselves and those large or teeming followership? These are the issues that you have to look at. And you can rest assured that the funding, and I made mention earlier on about the fact that the role of local populace in the sustenance of insurgency, because look at the ethnic cleavages, look at the religious cleavages. Sometimes they will not know that they are doing it. I could recall there is a particular community, not till when the security agencies found out, mothers will carry haversack as if they are going to, fumigate their farms, not knowing that actually they carry foodstuff that they will go and drop in the bush because their children were involved. So these are the kind of things, and they know that these children, what they are doing is not good for the society.
All right, General.
And beyond that, again, look at even the banditry we are having now.
Yeah.
It is simply because some of them, they are funding youth, with menial, opportunities.
Yes. Just one quick one.
A loan of 50,000.
Yeah, just one quick one, General. As I said, there's so much to unpack on this, but, there are also concerns all over the place about, the sincerity of government, in a manner of speaking. For instance, the previous government, President Jonathan, during his government said that there was an infiltration of some of these elements in his government. Is there any chance that there is such a system still perpetuated right now that we may or may not be aware of?
Well, I wouldn't know, because you need to have concrete evidence. But so far as to mention that in those years we wasted so much time in terms of conspiracy theory, and it is not supposed to be so.
Okay, I'm wondering.
I don't know if I.
Well, I just wanted to be sure that, as you said, we're not just playing to the gallery again, because the rumors are there, and it would seem like government is not making any concrete moves to debunk some of these rumors that are flying around, rightly or wrongly.
Well, it depends on the rumor. If only you can mention one or two, possibly with the little I know, possibly I might have an answer to that. But kindly be specific, then I think we will address it squarely.
Well, as I said, there are rumors, so if they are not founded, then why talk about them? Because, I mean, just one of those things is the one that I just talked about now, about the former government saying, you know, things like that. But then you also talked about the fact that we need to capitalize on education, unemployment, and all those things. And the president has made several pronouncements about that. I'm just wondering if you think we are really, really serious about those soft, you know, solutions that you mentioned earlier.
Well, if you recall, earlier on when we were having the conversation here with Maupe, I mentioned the issue about follow-up and synergy of efforts. And I think there is so much to be done in that regard.
You know, let me quickly look at some of the findings and some of the recommendations they are making. You know, normally when there are divisions within a house, you know, we tend to rejoice because we believe oftentimes that a divided house cannot stand. Sadly, this hasn't proven same with Boko Haram. It will seem that the more it's been divided, even though it might not be standing internally, the more violent it has been on the Nigerian populace. You agree with that?
Well, violence has always been their stock interest, so it's not surprising. But
I'm looking at this particular finding, which is finding number 9, that factional splits led to more, not less violence with Boko Haram's ideology, which was retained despite the divisions. So the recommendation is to not mistake factional disputes and changes in leadership as operational crisis for terrorist groups. How quickly have we been able to imbibe those lessons? Because that came to the fore recently when it was rumored, we're not sure now, Shekau has had more than how many lives, when it was rumored that he's been taken out by ISWAP. And there are those who were rejoicing, but there are those who were saying, who were cautioning that if ISWAP was indeed the one responsible for taking out Shekau, then we need to be more cautious. In fact, we need to be more careful as a people because that particular group is deemed to be more violent and more strategic in terms of how it engages. What are your thoughts on that, quickly?
Well, I think the thing people should understand is that without prejudice to the efforts of the military, they are doing very well. I could remember when there was a leadership crisis. In fact, when we had information about the death of Shekau, I broke the news. And I said, well, it's subject to confirmation. Eventually, even those who official or unofficial spokesmen for them eventually confirmed that information. But that notwithstanding, and the lesson in that was that the military took advantage of that skirmish, you know, because there were horse trading here and there, and the Air Force marvelously took out quite a number of the key leaders. It's just that information is not forthcoming from that end. So we are learning so much, and nobody is taking anything for granted. The fact that there are splinter groups, and even when, you know, ISWAP was born out of the Boko Haram, nobody has taken it for granted, because the issue of ideology and the fact that they are is just question of principles of targeting, you know, indiscriminate targeting of all humanity as against those they term as legitimate target between, you know, the ISWAP and the Shekau faction of that time. But nobody is taking it for granted, the fact that, so this recommendation and many other things, and some of the recommendations I even found that they tend to emphasize on the role of the international community as against the fact that we, yes, we have the capacity to deal with this problem. On the understanding, again, there are issues that need, you know, cooperation of our neighboring, you know, countries, more cooperations. Take, for instance, we have to really improve.
Well, in terms some people argue that is because of how the report itself is couched. Is how, you know, how to get lessons or getting lessons from the violent extremism that Boko Haram has become in Nigeria. That's what it's about. I don't think the lessons will be for us. Yes, we can get lessons from it, but it's for other people to learn, just what mistakes we made and perhaps what progress we're also making as well.
I think it's all encompassing. I think specifically most of the recommendations are targeted towards the Nigerian state and other world leaders and key policy makers or decision makers. And it depends on to what extent it has affected you, so you pick whatever is relevant to you or not. And really we have to commend them for such a marvelous effort, and that is how it's supposed to be. And I expect such things to have even come from the Nigerian state, because we should be able to take stock, of the various components, not just the military. I know the military, apart from even at the unit level, they have war diary and record keepings, but nationally, to what extent have we been taking stock? Kind of with the benefit of hindsight, what is it that we have been doing very well and to keep on improving on it? What is it that we have not been doing very well? And how do we leverage on those, areas that seems to assist us? And to what extent have we invest, in technology? Because whether we like it or not, the world has moved on. We are talking about jointness and all the rest, but people are talking about atmospheric and cyber warfare and what have you. So these are issues that we have to look at. And honestly, the reports come in handy, but I think we can do better than what they have even done.
Well, let us see how seriously we take the reports and even try to improve even better on the recommendations that have been put forward. We have to thank you very much for your time with us this morning, retired Brigadier General Sani Usman. Thank you for sharing your thoughts with us on Sunrise Daily. He is former spokesperson of the Nigerian Army. Sunrise Daily will continue in a moment to take on another matter. Please do not go away.